Okay, so what I thought I would do is take the next hour plus, and the plus is because pizza's going to arrive around 6:30, so that'll be my cue to stop talking and do more listening and interactive, because I want to make sure that I get a chance to answer your questions. So I'm going to talk for about an hour or so on fundraising. And the topic is very near and dear to my heart because I'm passionate about creating transparency between entrepreneurs and investors, which is something that is really rare. And so it's something I'm passionate about because I used to be an entrepreneur. And when I was an entrepreneur, I used to pitch VCs. And I had this experience many times of having no idea how VCs made decisions. I'd have a meeting, I thought it would go well, I'd get a lot of smiles, I'd walk out the door, and then I wouldn't get any callbacks. Or I would get, in some cases, this incredible flurry of activity, and I wouldn't know quite how to manage it. So when I became a VC about 10 years ago, I decided to start blogging about venture capital and entrepreneurship, and I wrote a lot about fundraising. And about 3 years ago, I started writing this book that came out about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, to try to capture some of the lessons that I had learned in my experience. And then also I interviewed a dozen VCs, a dozen great entrepreneurs, founder of Twitter, founder of LinkedIn, founder of Zynga, Constant Contact, number of other companies, and try to encapsulate those lessons. So that's what this talk will draw from. I had promised in the Skillshare class that I would give away 20 copies of the books to the first 20 people who enrolled. And so none of you won the lottery, I presume, the mass, crazy lottery that was just done, but booby prize. These are the folks that enrolled first. So if you're on this list, at the end of the class, come on up and grab a book. And I'm guessing not everybody's going to remember to do that, so feel free to grab a book and hover if the books aren't grabbed by one of those 20 people. I'll put that list again. Who's here who's on this list? Out of curiosity. Yeah, okay, so we'll make sure. I'll pass them out when we pass out the pizza. How about that? Okay, so here we go. So briefly on me, just so you know my background. So I'm currently a venture capitalist. I'm a partner at a firm called Flybridge Capital Partners, which I helped found about 10 years ago. We're an early stage firm in Boston and New York City, and on our third fund, we do seed and Series A investing. So that's the main activity that I do. And we got about 40 active portfolio companies today in the market. I also teach part-time at HBS. Some of my students are here, which is great to see. I taught this class called Launching Technology Ventures, which is a second-year class on product market fit, scaling, and creating lean startups. I didn't talk about fundraising in that class, so one of the reasons I'm doing this is because a lot of my students said, hey, we want to hear about fundraising. Talk about that. I used to be an entrepreneur. I mentioned that previously. I started a company called UPromise with a partner, and previously was an executive at a company called Open Market, which went public in '96. UPromise raised about $110 million. While I was president, we raised about 90. So that was my fundraising experience. And then I wrote this book and I have this blog. Okay. So I'm going to try to open up the black box for you. And you should ask me questions along the way. And then we'll also save time for questions at the end. But if you don't walk out of here with your questions answered, then it's your own fault, because I'm here to answer your questions. Beforehand, I asked a few of you, what questions do you want to make sure you would want me to answer? And I try to incorporate that in the materials, but definitely make sure your questions come up. Nice thing about these classes, these Skillshare classes, is it's very informal, very open. So the first thing I want to just say a couple things is that, VC capital is not for everyone. And I often see too many entrepreneurs get stuck on the idea of raising VC money when it's actually not a good fit for their business. And I'll talk a little more about what VCs look for, but it's something for you to think about as to whether VC capital even makes sense for you in the context of your business. These are the reasons why you might want to raise capital, and then I'll tell a little bit about what VCs look for. So why would you want a VC involved? I'll go clockwise. First, from the bottom left, value add. So if there's something specific that you need help on, strategy, business development, insight, connections, what have you, good venture capital firms have a lot of value add. By the way, I'm going to generalize. There are bad actors in any industry. There are bad angels, bad VCs. I'm going to assume, for purposes of this discussion, that we're only talking about good actors. So if there are case studies of bad actors, feel free to raise them if you want, but I'm going to focus on sort of rational, normal behavior. So anyway, so that's value add. Deep pockets. People forget that when you raise capital, you're really only doing it to run some experiments, and when those experiments are over, you'll have to raise more capital, and then you'll raise more capital, and then you'll raise more capital. And if you have VCs, they have typically the ability to reserve 2 to 1, 3 to 1 dollars against what they put in. So if they put in $1 million, they may reserve $3 million. Our average first check size is $3 or $4 million, $2 to $4 million, and yet we reserve 3 times that typically over the life of our investments. So that, if you have that desire, that's very helpful. Experience matters. VCs have seen the movie. Across my partners, we've had collectively over 100 portfolio companies that we've sat on the boards of. That's a set of data that we've got to bring to bear. And then swinging big, if you want to go for a big win, then raising VC capital makes sense. So a lot of people in this room are going to pursue dual paths, I would guess, VCs or angels. Anybody know, by the way, who that character is under the VC column? The Vulture. That's a great reference. Good comic book reference. DC or Marvel?
Both. Way back in the day, yeah.
Do you know, is it a DC character or Marvel? Marvel character. Good. So the Vulture. So just my little sidebar on Vulture capitalists. So there's a real difference between what VCs look for and what angels look for, and people get confused sometimes. They think they are the same, and they think they look for the same things. And in truth, they're very different, and they act very different, and they're incented very differently. So VCs are very focused on controlling their capital. They'll demand some elements of control, whether it's a board seat, whether it's voting rights, whether it's a veto on an acquisition. A standard term sheet from a VC will say, you can't raise money without my vote. You can't sell your company without my vote. You can't, and I can hire and fire the CEO. That will be the standard VC control provisions. The standard angel will say, hey, whatever. I don't really care. I only want to own 5%, 10%, no big deal. And they're not going to be as focused on control. Now, the flip side is the VC is very engaged in their portfolio. They get paid by their limited partners to be engaged. So all VCs have capital that they get from investors, and they have fees on top of that capital, just like you have a mutual fund where you pay 1% or 0.5% to Vanguard or Fidelity. LPs pay us, a couple percentage points to manage the money, and for that, we are very engaged in the portfolio. Angels don't get paid, typically, and so are not as engaged and don't have as much time to give, nor do they have the incentive to give as much time. It's just the math of the business and how they're incented. Both can be great value add, and we have a lot of deals where we have both angels and VCs, but again, very different in how they think about things. And both can be total disasters. Okay, so where a VC is a disaster is where they exert their control in a way that's against the wishes of the entrepreneur, and where angels are disasters are where they totally abandon their investments or act irrationally, because angels don't have the same economic, rational incentives necessarily that a VC does. Sometimes they only invest for emotional reasons or for personal reasons. Maybe they have a connection with you, and when things change, and if they're not professional investors, they can freak out, and bad things can happen. So when I talk in this dialogue, in this presentation, I'll probably talk more about the VC perspective, but I will try to feather in angel references. Many angels have clustered into groups called super angels or professional angel groups, like here in Boston. There are a few of these. There are a few of these in San Francisco and New York. who are professionally managed, and they act in effect like VCs. And the people who run those angel groups, like Common Angels here in Boston, they have professional managers who in effect act like VCs. Cool so far? Anybody have any questions on that? Okay. So what do the VCs focus on? I am always surprised when entrepreneurs don't do research on VCs. So I see a lot of times entrepreneurs walk into meetings with VCs and they have no idea what that firm's strategy is. They have no idea what that partner's competitive advantage and practice areas of interest are. And they have no idea what the reputation is of that individual partner or that individual firm. They get so excited they get a meeting, and they're so busy doing other stuff that they don't do their own homework before they walk into that meeting. And there are a couple key dimensions that you have to look at before you walk into a VC meeting. One is how big is their fund, because the size of the check that they write will be proportional to the fund. So the typical rule of thumb is take the fund size and divide by 20 to 30, because any given VC portfolio is typically only going to have 20 to 30 companies in that portfolio. So if you have a $500 million fund, typically they want to put in $25 million all the way down to $15 million into each company. Now, that may not mean they do it all in one check, like what I described to you. So with our $200+ million fund, we put in $10 to $12 million over the life of a company. So take whatever the fund size is, divide by 20 to 30, and think about, is that a fit for me and my business? Then you have to look at the stage they invest in. So do they typically invest in pre-revenue companies, pre-product companies, post-revenue, profitable, unprofitable? What stage, Series A, seed, B, C, where do they invest along that spectrum? Then you have to look at what domains do they invest in? What's their pattern in terms of sectors and that firm as a whole and that partner in particular. And what's amazing to me is, again, entrepreneurs don't do even that basic homework to figure out whether what they're doing is in the sweet spot of that particular VC partner and that particular VC. You'll hear me say this a lot of times over this session. VCs and angels, by definition, are overloaded with deals. So they get so much inbound activity, and they have to be very good at saying no. VCs and angels are professional no-sayers. Yeah?
Hi, my name's Kelly.
Kelly? Kelly,
Kelly,
you said?
Kelly.
Yeah, hey Kelly, thanks.
VCs make the decision in the first 8 words.
Yeah.
What's your opinion about that?
So I have this, on the third bullet, I have this thing, VCs blink. I don't know if it's 8 words, but I would say in the first few minutes, and I'll describe that here, they make a very quick decision whether they want to spend more time with you or not. And I did a blog post this VC's Blink blog post, where I suggested to entrepreneurs, 15 minutes into the meeting, they stop. And they say, is this the kind of, am I talking about the kinds of things that you want to hear? Just do a quick check-in. Because entrepreneurs will walk into meetings and just go. They're so excited, they're so hyped up, and they don't stop and just check in and say, am I on track with what you want to hear? Is this of interest to you? Because you can save a lot of time if, after 15 minutes, the VC says, you know what? I don't do infrastructure software. I don't even know why we're having this meeting. I did it as a favor for the person who brought you in. So, not that rudely, but that would be the essence of that, what you get from the check-in. Which leads to the next thing I wanted to say, which is about warm introductions. We've done 60 deals in our partnership. I can't think of a single one that we've done off of a cold introduction. Maybe like 1 or 2. And any VC firm will say the same thing. Any angel group will say the same thing. The quality of the introduction defines the prioritization that deal gets put on that deal. So here's the top of the pyramid. Somebody who has made me money. So any entrepreneur that has made money for that VC firm, if that individual says to the partner who sat on their board, you need to take a meeting with Dan and hear his pitch about his energy drink they will take that meeting 100 times out of 100. If Dan sends in a random note over LinkedIn to the partner, that's the bottom of the pyramid. That's a 0 out of 100 hit rate. And so think about what's in the middle. Who do you know in the partnership who knows you? Who have you worked with in the past that can vouch for you, that may know somebody at the partnership? Just kind of march on down. Who's a VP in their portfolio? Maybe not the CEO, but maybe a VP or a director who knows the firm. And when somebody offers to you, I'll introduce you to that firm, take a step back and think, this person is now representing me and my brand. So are they of the quality of the relationship and of the nature of their relationship with me that they're appropriate to represent me and my brand? So at UPromise, we decided we really wanted to target John Doerr at Kleiner Perkins. We were an education startup, B2C consumer, and I thought John Doerr would be the absolute best investor for me. John Doerr didn't know I existed. Okay, he didn't know me from a hole in the wall. But I knew, and my partner knew, 3 people who we knew John Doerr well. One who was a CEO he had backed, and 2 who he sat on boards with. And so within a 1-week period, we orchestrated 3 introductions to John Doerr. So within a week, John Doerr gets 3 notes saying, you've got to meet this company in Boston called UPromise, run by Jeff Busgang and Michael Bronner. I know them, great guys, doing something really interesting, take a meeting. And so in the course of 1 week, suddenly it looks like it's a hot deal because these 3 people who he trusts are pinging him and saying, hey, there's something going on in Boston, really interesting deal, you should get to know it. So that quality of introduction led us to eventually having John and Kleiner be an investor in our firm because we got started off on a really good foot. So that's the point about warm introductions. Really evaluate in that kind of hierarchy where you sit and how you can get in the door.
My name is Tony.
Hey, Tony.
Quick question around the timing of the introduction.
Yeah.
Do you warm hands before you start fundraising, or should you kind of hold off until you're ready to start asking for money?
So I am a big believer, I make a reference later, in investors like to invest in movies, not snapshots. And what I mean by that is if I see you at the moment you're raising money and we have one quick moment in time and I'm forced to make a decision, I'm going to be more negatively biased than if I get to see you over time. So the warm introduction, the benefit of that is you walk in, you say, hey, I'm not fundraising. I just want to tell you what I'm doing, get your feedback, tell you the 3 things I'm going to achieve over the next 6 months, and then I'll check in again. I had a company, I don't know if people know this company called Brontis, which is a 3D imaging company for dentists. And a student at HBS, class of 03, was the founder and came up to me after class and said literally that. I'm working with a professor from MIT. This is what I'm working on. Can I just talk to you about it? Met him, talked to me about it, gave him some input, went off. And 3 months later, he came back and said, hey, here's what, I want to give you an update. Here's what we've done. And he did the ABC he told me he would do, and then he also had achieved DEF. We talked some more. 3 months later, he comes back. Hey, look what else I've done. And he showed me this movie over time that allowed me to extrapolate. I used to be a management consultant at the Boston Consulting Group, and there's this joke about consultants. They can extrapolate on 1 data point. I guess good VCs can do that as well, but it's much better to extrapolate on 2 or 3 data points and trend lines over time. So I'm personally a fan of getting to know entrepreneurs, having entrepreneurs get to know you in a non-stressful, you need to make a decision within 24 hours environment. So I made the comment about VCs blink to your question. Lauren, right? Kelly, sorry. I'm looking at Lauren over here. Kelly, so the VCs blink, and I think that's very true. And there is something about whatever you present in the beginning that they react to very quickly in a positive or negative way, and you just have to be thoughtful about that. So don't downplay risk. When you are really explicit about risks, VCs really respect that. When you try to cover stuff up, VCs and investors really get nervous because they say, well, wait a minute, you're not disclosing to me risks. You're not telling me your plan to mitigate those risks. I'm asking questions that are uncovering these problems, so can I really trust you to be on top of them? And so it's really impressive when entrepreneurs come in and say, hey, look, here's my business, here's what we're doing. This will fail if the following 3 things happen. And so here's my plan to address those 3 things and be really proactive and thoughtful about it. That's a much more impressive story than when people come in and say, here's what I'm doing, no competition, no risks, the thing's going to be totally magic. You had a question?
Yes, John. There's been, for the last few years, more and more firms that have open hours, like over at the
Office hours.
Like, hey,
Yeah.
what do you think about those in general? I mean, how are they doing, and what are your thoughts as a person to use that as a vehicle?
Yeah, I think the moment you feel like you're ready to engage someone in a relationship where you have something of substance to talk about and something that will reflect well on you and on the business, you should take advantage of the office hours. It used to be that the venture capital industry was a very closed industry. It's now crazy transparent. So it's like an intelligence test to me. If you can't get to me, like other VCs have the same view. They're like, if you can't get to me, I blog, I tweet, I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I show up at these events. Like if you can't find a way to get to me, the best you can do is a cold email. Forget it. So I think if you can find natural avenues to get in front of venture capitalists and investors, it's terrific. You should take advantage of it. At the moment, you're ready to present a good impression and something that's compelling to react to. The last point I make here is about mutual due diligence. I'm surprised that I think the best entrepreneurs really think about choosing VCs like they choose executive team members and business partners. It's as critical a decision, if not more. And just like you wouldn't hire a co-founder without doing extensive due diligence on them and finding out how they react when things go well and how they react when things go poorly, you should not take on a VC partner until you've done diligence on them. When you get in the heat of a deal and term sheets start flying and you get all excited because you feel like you're the belle of the ball, you got to take a step back and say, all right, wait a minute. Let me ask around because they seem great when everything's bright and shiny, but how do they really react when things go poorly? So more on Blink. Oh, go ahead.
My name's Alex. I just had a question.
Yeah.
The last thing you said about things going poorly. I've read some articles about how if the size of the ticket is too small for the VC, then they're more likely to let you fail if things aren't going well. And what's your experience with that? Is that
Yeah.
true, and how do you manage that?
I think it is true that there's this phenomenon of seed investing leads VCs to walk away from companies more frequently. We were competing on a seed deal, and we ended up winning the deal, and I asked the entrepreneur afterwards, why did you end up picking us? And he said, well, when I did my diligence on you guys and I asked you about this, you told me you do a handful of seed deals a year and you treat them like a full deal. And the other firm told me, proudly, they do 20 seeds a year and they only invest in 5 as a follow-on. And I didn't want to be one of those 15. And so you just have to ask, what's the philosophy? Different firms have different philosophies. I was talking to an entrepreneur the other day who said, he had 4 investors in his $1 million company investment. He had raised $1 million. He had 4 VC funds in the deal, which is stunning. But a lot of firms are just putting small seeds in just to get a toehold and build a relationship, and it's very easy to walk away from a $200,000 check. So you just have to be thoughtful about that.
How transparent are the VCs now, as you just said, that they will walk away in the 15 out of the 20 they invested in the seed?
What do you mean by how transparent are they?
I mean,
If they walk away, that's pretty transparent.
yeah,
But
but
do you
how
mean-
you know that they will walk away? I mean, you're not going to know those 15
Yeah.
companies.
Investors like optionality. There's value in options. It's sort of finance 101. So what typically they will do is try to create options for themselves, and they'll wait to the last minute, typically, because something may happen, right? Something spectacular might turn around. There's a company called Turntable.fm. Some of you may know. The original incarnation was Sticky Bits, which didn't go anywhere. It was sort of a failed plan. But the investors that kind of hung around had a chance to see it flip, and at the last minute were able to participate and now a more interesting company. So investors will typically wait till the last minute before they really have to make a decision. When I became a VC, like when I was an entrepreneur, it was very funny. I had to relearn all these things. So you probably all get this because you're all entrepreneur oriented. But as an entrepreneur, time is your enemy. As a VC, time is your friend. The more time, the better. As a VC, you want to see things and see how things evolve. As an entrepreneur, you want to make decisions, move fast, reduce cycle time. As an entrepreneur, oftentimes optionality was your enemy. Too much uncertainty, lack of clarity for the team, defocusing. For a VC, optionality is great. You always want to, I had all these new language I had to learn, like turn over another card. I didn't know what that meant. My partner said, hey, let's turn over another card on that one. I said, what does that mean? But it's, like, let's just see how it goes, take one more step forward and kind of hang around a little bit. So VCs blink. So here's some numbers for you. VCs typically see 300 to 500 companies a year. And they typically invest in one or two. That's each partner at a VC firm. So a 5-person partnership, they'll see 2,000 or 3,000 deals and invest in 7 or 10 a year. That's the typical math. So each year there are about 1,500 companies that receive investment capital from venture capitalists. And there are about 1,000 VCs that are doing that investing. So about 1.5 deals per VC per year. Now, that's not including seeds where they're passive. That's on the board, focused, target ownership. I mentioned it. I had a slide on it before, but target ownership at 20%, 15%, 25%, that sort of range. So you think about that. Being a venture capitalist, it's a very ADD job, right? Because you're seeing all these things. And the weird thing about being a VC is you want to see everything. Like the best VCs see, it's a pattern recognition game. So the best VCs, they pick a category, social networking, SaaS, whatever, and they want to see everything in that category. And then they want to spend time on very, very few deals. Like at any given time, a VC wants to be proactively working on 2 or 3 new deals at any given time. So if you're in meetings with a venture capitalist, you should ask them, am I one of the 2 most important new deals you're working on right now? And if the answer is no, then you know you're just having relationship meetings as opposed to you're really in a process. So if you're not one of the 2, maybe 3 most important things that they're working on at that moment in time, you're not really in an investment process. Yeah.
They tell you if you aren't?
Most people don't lie when you ask them a direct question. And the behavior you can tell, right? Like, are they calling you? Are they proactively setting up meetings? Are they exposing you to their partners? There's a really clear pattern that you can observe. By the way, I'm sorry about these polls. I'm trying to move around as best I can to kind of keep people visible with me. This is kind of a funky room. There's a pattern, right? There's like, the pattern is, it's like an animal in heat when they're focused on a deal. Okay, they're on it, they're calling, why haven't you returned my email? Why haven't you returned my call? And then the flip side is the entrepreneur, when it's like radio silence, there's a message, right? There's a movie, I think Jennifer Aniston is in it, He's Not That Into You. So, like, there's a message there if they're not being really quick and responsive. If you're not top on their priority list, you can tell.
Don't you think that if you have to ask this question, the answer is probably you are not one of the 2?
Probably.
Because from what you just said, you don't have to ask when they are acting like that. Right?
Probably. Yeah, probably. But, somebody told me the other day, they said, hey, I've had 3 meetings with this partner. I can't figure out why I'm not getting a term sheet. And, they'll meet. Yeah. They'll still do meetings because you're compelling. Maybe they think, you're an interesting person. You're working on something that they like, but they're just not ready to make a decision. Entrepreneurs don't ask enough questions of VCs in general about their process, about their decision-making process, about the firm's process, about who has power in a firm. I talk about this a bunch in the book. Partnerships are all structured very differently. Most VC partnerships, the whole partnership has to be supportive of a deal before a deal happens. And so if you're not getting full partnership exposure, you're not on a process. You're not in a process typically. And what happens is your deal champion has to go to the partnership and sell the deal. So you have to turn your deal champion into your salesperson. And you have to arm them with the data and the materials, whatever, to help them make the case to the rest of the partnership that you should be that one or two thing that they focus on for a new deal over the course of that year. Yeah? Did you have a question? No. So I have this analogy. It's like college applications. All of you can relate to this. Like if you were an admissions officer, you have a stack of college applications. Do you know the average time an admissions officer spends on a college application? Like 10 minutes. Like you put your heart and soul into your body of work and essays and recommendations and scores and everything else in this transcript, and you put that forward, and the admissions officer looks at it, 10 minutes, and you're in the yes pile or no pile. And that's how VCs operate when they receive information about you or when they meet you for the first time. Very quickly they have to triage. Okay, the other thing you hear a lot from VCs is that ideas don't really matter. What really matters is the team and the ability for, it's not having a full team. People get a little bit hung up on this. It's not about having the full team in place. It's about having what I'll call a Pied Piper, some core leader who you think, if you project forward, again, extrapolating forward, that they can attract a great management team. So, these were young entrepreneurs at the time they got capital. Bill Gates, Michael Dell, Mark Zuckerberg. These are easy examples to throw out there. But they all got backed because at that moment in time, whoever the investor was that was evaluating the investment, they said, look, this is a young kid, not a lot of experience, not a track record I could evaluate, but they are so compelling, I know they'll be a magnet for talent. And so that's a really important criteria. Again, it's not just about the ideas. It's about the quality of the execution and the quality of the team. So here's the investor decision tree. This is you were asking this before about the Blink. So the investors will ask, very simple. They get something by email or phone. Somebody recommends to me, here's a deal you should look at. I've heard about this person. Here's a quick summary. And in a few minutes, you have to evaluate, is it interesting enough to take a phone call or not? Yes or no? You take a meeting, maybe it's 30 minutes, or maybe you do a phone call. If it's not interesting after that, the VC will hopefully pass gracefully, or they'll take another meeting. This is more typically in person, 60 to 90 minutes, more in depth, and then another meeting after that. That's sort of the typical funnel. And at that point, you'll enter into what I'll call the serious due diligence phase. You will not be in serious due diligence until the VC, as I said, acts like an animal in heat, and they start asking you for stuff. Show me your pipeline. Show me your technical plan. Give me the bios of the team. Let me see your references. If you start hearing from people in your network, hey, so-and-so just called me about you, asking me questions about what you're working on. The VC is not actually doing work when they meet with you. Meeting is a passive thing. If a VC takes a meeting with you, that's a passive act. What you need to see is when they make an active act, when they generate the energy, not are the receivers of the energy and all the energy is on you. That's when serious diligence kicks in. My Prince Charming clip art. Okay, so the kinds of things they look for when in those meetings, investors invest in people. So they want to invest in people that they like. It sounds kind of simple, but it's really true. People invest in people they find personally compelling and that they like. And so they want to hear your story because they invest in stories. You don't have a plant to invest in. You're investing in a person's story and their character. You should be really crisp. I have found that one of the things that kills great investor pitches is just being long-winded. Just people going on about their personal stories. They start getting defensive when they talk about the company that didn't go well. They just go off on tangents. And as the investor, you're sitting there and saying, you're eating into your first 30 minutes. Because when 30 minutes are over, you're done. The buzzer's off, pencil's down. I make my decision whether I spend any more time with you. So be really focused. The other thing I say is good investors are very intellectually curious, so they'll ask you a lot of questions. The problem is if investors ask you a lot of questions, you go on more tangents. It's this really crazy conundrum. For some of you who have been with VCs, you see it. And then suddenly time's up and you didn't get to what you want to get to. So don't be afraid to push off questions, kind of, think about managing the room, even if you're only managing a one-on-one, but manage the room. It's a sales pitch. You got to manage it, manage the time, be really thoughtful about how you craft and shape the meeting, and allow the tangents a little bit, but bring it all back to the focus. And then the final thing is know your stuff. So I told you my story about John Doerr. So John Doerr took a meeting with us, although what he really did was he had, after hearing from 3 people that he should meet with me, he said, okay, I'm going to have my junior partner screen this company because I don't really know these guys, and even though I've got great recommendations, let me have my junior partner screen them. Very common. So phone call, we got our 30 minutes of fame, phone call with the junior partner at Kleiner Perkins, and whatever we said got us to the next level. And we went through the process, and we got the ultimate partners meeting. Now, the partners meeting is where you go up in front of the full partnership, and your champion presumably is saying to the partnership, hey, we should do this deal, I recommend it. Otherwise, they wouldn't have you come to the full partnership, and they wouldn't put their personal reputation at the firm at stake. But you've got to pass through the full partnership. So we walk into the Kleiner Perkins partnership, nice big glass conference room, and everybody's in the room. Vinod Khosla, who was still at Kleiner Perkins at the time, John Doerr, a bunch of other partners. And I was on the job for 1 week. Okay? So we started flipping through the deck, and we get to the business model. And I'm the MBA in the room. My partner wasn't, he sort of looked to me as like the business guy. He was the idea guy. So John Doerr asks a question about the business model, really specific. Like, why on this slide in year 2 do you show this crossover point with gross margins at this level? And my business partner kind of froze, and he flipped and he looked to me. And I totally froze. And the problem was I didn't know my stuff. I walked into a meeting, which I'm horrified to admit now, but I actually walked into a partners meeting at Kleiner Perkins to raise what ended up being $34 million of total capital in this round of financing. And I didn't know every single cell on the spreadsheet on the model because VCs are professional nudges at finding these little things to just poke at you. And what they're doing is they don't really care all that much about the answer. They care about the test. And the test is, if I push here, do I see a lot of depth, or is it paper thin? And we do this naturally all the time. You kind of hone that skill. And so whatever you're presenting, whenever you walk into that meeting, in addition to all your homework I said about background on them and what they invest in, what they're focused on, make sure you really know your stuff. It is so obvious to me when an entrepreneur comes in, and in 30 minutes, if I just push on 2 or 3 areas, if they show tremendous depth, then I'm immediately interested in learning more. And if I push in 2 or 3 areas and it's paper thin, then I think the whole thing is a house of cards. When we got a call, the junior partner called me, and we said, how'd we do? How'd it go? And he said, we're going to make the investment. But I got to tell you, Jeff, for a guy in a team that had such good reputations, you guys really didn't know the details. And it almost lost us the capital raise. So we had to really focus on honing our own knowledge of the business model and the details. And that's exactly what you need to do as well. Okay, a couple other things. Things to avoid. Exaggerating. So this happens a lot. Assume anything you say in a meeting will be totally verified in due diligence. If you say, I was the co-founder of XYZ, and I happen to be interested in this deal, I will speak to 5 people at that firm and find out if you really were the co-founder or if you were employee number 40 and are taking inappropriate credit for the success of that company. We are professional BS detectors, right? Because imagine, VCs get pitched every day, 10 times a day, and people are always trying to spin them and BS them. And so investors are really good at kind of that BS detection, but then also having a network to diligence you. I'll admit this now in front of a bunch of MBA students, but most VCs, when they do diligence on you, will talk to your classmates and section mates. For the next 20, maybe 30 years, your section mates will be asked about you in diligence at some point. It's amazing because somebody will know someone who knows one of them, and they'll say, hey, what'd you think of XYZ? I'm talking to them about investing in their company. How were they when you got to know them in school? And it's true at undergraduate level. It's true at every job you do. It's true of your neighbors. It's true of your high school. It's true of your social friends. All of those will be elements of references that will be tested in a diligence process, in a good diligence process. Second no-no is self-aggrandizement. A lot of I. That's again just a really bad red flag. People see that and they think, okay, this is not a person who can attract a great team. And the final thing is don't name drop. Because again, assume you will be tested. So if you claim to have a great relationship with Marc Andreessen, then the next natural question is, well, then why isn't Marc Andreessen leading this deal? If you claim to have a great relationship with Bill Salmon, then someone's going to check in on Bill Salmon and he's going to say, yeah, I do remember vaguely I had that student. I can't tell you how they were or how they performed in the class. So be really careful about only referencing people and situations that will stand under scrutiny. Okay, so here are the things that VCs will measure you on. So I talked about why VCs, why pursue them in terms of the size of market if you're going after something big. How do I define big? Most VCs will define big as about $500 million market, which means that you can do something like $100 million in revenue if you get 20% of that market. Anything below that, most investors will say, it's not a good fit, it's not big enough. It's probably the most common turn down reason that you will hear from an investor. I don't think what you're doing is a big enough idea. By the way, that's what everybody said about Foursquare, Airbnb, Dropbox, the investors that turn those companies down. It just sounded small at the beginning, so it's not tragic. It's just what you will often hear until you prove out there's a really much bigger vision and a bigger platform. Second thing is unfair advantage. Why you and why now? If 3 people in Boston are starting this company, why is it that you will have, comparatively speaking, an unfair advantage compared to 3 people in Silicon Valley, 3 people in Beijing, 3 people in Bangalore who have the exact same idea right now? So what is it about you, your history, your relationships, your Rolodex, your background that makes you uniquely qualified and gives you an unfair advantage against competition? Next thing, attractive business model. There's a certain business model that investors look for, and the pattern is recurring high gross margin revenue, whether that's a SaaS model, whether that's a transaction-based business model. There's subscription models for consumer businesses. Lumpy, low gross margin business models just categorically are less appealing to investors than these higher, predictably attractive business models. And then finally, unique technology, or maybe a business model approach, but typically unique technology. A lot of investors will actually score you. At the end of a meeting, when we get far enough in the diligence process, we grade a company. And we have 7 criteria that we use. Some of them are here. We also look at network effects and competition, and we'll do scores, 1 to 5 scores, and each partner will vote. And a lot of other firms do this because it puts the data on the table about how to evaluate this particular opportunity. So think about how you would evaluate yourself and your company as an entrepreneur if you did that vote. Quality of team, size of market, business model attractiveness, competitive landscape, network effects, the whole range. And then, the other things people like to see, they like to see a Pied Piper, as I said before. You can recruit, good interpersonal chemistry, and then the movie, not a snapshot. Okay, I touched on this a little bit, but so you've had a good meeting, now what? One of you asked me, I've had a bunch of good meetings. How do I get them to the next level? How do I get them to commit and push forward down the process? And the framework I would give to you is treat fundraising like a sales process. So think about it as you have a pipeline of prospective investors. They're just like prospects in a sales process. You've got to understand what their decision process looks like. You got to understand who the decision makers are and how they run their decision process. And then you just got to push them through the pipeline, stage by stage. And you've got to sequence it and time it in such a way that you create a competitive dynamic. This is different from sales, a sense of urgency and a competitive dynamic to create the conversion from interesting conversations to, a dog in heat. So that's the mentality you have to have. A lot of firms I know who do this really well when they fundraise, they have spreadsheets. Every investor, name, pain point, issues, and they just track everything, just like you would if you were running a sales process and you were trying to close the make the company sales deal or business development deal. I mentioned before, VCs only do 2 or 3 things at any time. They also get distracted easily. So they're getting hit all the time with the next thing and the next thing. So you've got to stay top of mind. You've got to find ways to be proactively engaged with them and have reasons to reconnect with them. Give them more data, feed them updates, things of that nature. Yeah?
When's too much? When is overselling?
I think you probably have a good judge of that. I mean, if you're not getting positive feedback or a vibe from them when you give them updates, people confuse being polite with being really interested. Because in this day and age, with so much transparency, bad behavior is strongly discouraged, and being rude and disrespectful there's a big backlash against that when someone exhibits that behavior. So what tends to happen is investors will tend to be super polite and super respectful and not honest. And I don't mean dishonest, but just not honest and direct about how they really feel about your business and where you really stand. Which is why one of the themes I want to really hammer again and again is you have to take control of the process. You have to ask questions. You have to demand clarity as to where am I in the process? Am I giving you too much information? Is it okay if I keep sending you updates? Can I come back in a couple weeks to get together again? And if sometimes I've said to people, that's too short. I'm not going to be any more interested in 2 weeks than I am now. Here's a bar you have to hit. Come back to me when you've hit that bar. That's a perfectly appropriate conversation to have.
Just to build off of that, how does that change when you're approaching it like a movie compared to pitching? So you set up a connection, you're trying to get them up to date on, hey, this is what I've been doing, just want to keep you updated versus we pitched last week, what did you think?
Yeah.
I'm not expecting people to be more attentive when I'm just updating them on my progress, but that said, is there something going too far on that? Does it hurt to keep people up to date?
It doesn't hurt if you have good news. And if you're progressing towards something they've said to you is really important. So if in a get-to-know-you meeting somebody says, boy, I really question unit economics. I just don't buy the unit economics. Great. Let me come back to you when I have more data on unit economics. Don't come back unless you have more data on unit economics. Get the hint. And sometimes you can't afford to be in a relationship building phase, right? Sometimes you've got to go after it because you need money. And in those situations, sometimes you have to qualify out of the discussion, just like in a sales process you would qualify out. What I mean by qualify out is, if I were a sales rep and I was starting off a new job and I was given a phone book and a telephone, I would never flip through A to Z on the phone book, right? I would try to find some qualification criteria and qualify out the people who are bad targets and focus my energies on the good targets. Similarly, as an entrepreneur, you want to qualify out VCs and focus on the ones that are going to be good targets for you. You don't want to waste your time with bad targets. And so my earlier point about targeting, also about taking control of the process, asking them, is this a fit for you? Are you interested? Because if they're not interested, don't waste time. You've got such a finite amount of time to dedicate to the fundraising process. You really want to be focused. Dana.
Well, investors treat you differently if you need money versus if you want money, and how urgent it is for you.
What's the difference in your mind?
I mean, so one is maybe you have more runway, but it's not like I need it, ASAP, or else this thing's going to shut down. Versus like now it makes sense, maybe a strategic, growth opportunity. It'd be nice to have now for whatever market reason.
Right. Yeah, desperation plays really poorly in investor pitches. So when somebody says, "Hey, thanks for the great meeting. By the way, I have 1 month of cash left, so I really need you to decide today and wire in 30 days." That's a bad way to frame a meeting. So it is better if you have runway, if you have options. Again, it's optionality has, think about in a negotiation, leverage. Okay? You want to have the greatest amount of leverage possible over the venture capital firm. And so leverage means you need alternatives. You either need an alternative investor that you find equally compelling, in which case you can get a really good competitive dynamic going, or you need alternatives like, I have more runway, I can just put my head down for 3 months and execute and then come back to the fundraising market. I'm cash flow break even, I don't really need to raise money, I've got an angel. Anybody who, one thing I always tell my firms is fundraise 6 months before you need the money. That's sort of my rule of thumb, because it takes so long, 3 or 4 months, and you don't want to run it right to the end.
Building on what you were saying on leverage, how often do you see the entrepreneur having more leverage on the VC? I mean, does that case...
It's magic when it happens.
That doesn't happen
It's
very
awesome. No, it does happen.
It does.
And it's awesome for the entrepreneur.
So how do you manage that? Between VCs and...
Yeah. So the best way to get leverage is to have multiple term sheets and multiple choices. And so you have to navigate the process in such a way that you have really high quality alternatives in front of you. So I was pursuing a deal where I was more in passive mode for a number of meetings, because I like the entrepreneur, I like the space, but I was busy and distracted on other things, and I wasn't so compelled that I put it at the top of my stack. And he did not tell me, you have to make a decision. So we complicitly went through a get-to-know-you process over a period of time. And I kind of put it back burner, came to it again, back burnered it, came to it again. And a couple months into it, he said, "Hey, I'm going to get a term sheet in a week." That got my attention. And I'd gotten to know him well enough and the company well enough that I thought it was interesting. And so for a week, I crashed on it and made a decision whether I should pursue it or not. Now, he did a masterful job. He might have been bluffing me. We have had entrepreneurs bluff us. We always figure out the bluff, almost always. And so if we blink, we say, actually, I'm not ready to make a decision. I need another week. If they say, "Oh, you can have another week. I didn't actually get that term sheet," that's a bad sign. If they say, you don't have another week, I can give you till like 1 more day, 2 more days, then I know they're not bluffing. So any of you who have been involved in deals in any negotiation, there are tactics and techniques to determine whether you're really in a competitive process or it's a faux competitive process. Don't create a faux competitive process. Create a real competitive process where you have real alternatives that you're excited to pursue, and then you'll get a great flurry of activity.
So in your position, do you view those alternatives as true equals? Like, let's say somebody's coming to Flybridge looking to raise a $5 million Series A, and they say, well, our alternative is to go with a second-tier fund and raise less money or something like
Right.
that. I mean, do you look at that and think, well, we need to act or you look at it and say, well, we're still in a really good position, so we'll keep our optionality until we're really.
It really depends, but as an entrepreneur, you don't want to show that weakness. So you want to create some opacity. Like some entrepreneurs are too transparent.
Yeah.
They'll say, "You're my top choice, and if you get to the table,
Gives you no leverage.
I'll pick you." Gives you no leverage.
Yeah.
As opposed to, I have 2 or 3 great firms. You're great. I have another great firm, and I'd love to work with you. But I do have choices. You know, so you gotta as an entrepreneur, you just gotta navigate things gracefully, respectfully, but in such a way that you create a competitive dynamic.
So what do you do in the and maybe this is a different equation for you, but I've had this happen to me a couple times where I've walked in, the first thing the VC will say is, so I know you talked to VC XYZ.
Yeah,
It's like,
guess how they know.
Well, I'm sure they're all talking to each other.
All VCs talk to each other.
Yeah.
Just like all entrepreneurs talk to each other.
Yeah.
Hey, I just had this meeting. What do you think of them?
So how do you phrase that when you're trying to be opaque about who
Yeah.
you're talking to?
So here's
They
the.
already know.
Unfortunately, VCs collude.
Okay.
And what that means is that there's high communication bandwidth amongst firms and partners and relationships. Just like if 2 of your classmates were investors and you became an investor, you guys are friends first, colleagues second, you talk. And all of us have that same situation. So we're always chattering about different situations. You can't really prevent that. The only way you can mitigate that a little bit is if you really emphasize what's confidential and what's not confidential as an entrepreneur. So you can say, look, and you can be a little more opaque. You can say, look, I've had a number of meetings with people who I'm really excited about. And the VC may say, oh, like firm X. And you can say, hey, I'm not going to talk about who. I've had a lot of meetings, and a few people are really excited, more than one. You know, so you sort of keep it general and try to make it opaque.
I mean, that was part of my question. I guess one follow-up on the negotiating side. To what extent do the VCs sort of talk and share some terminology that, or in some terms, like
Prices?
Yeah.
So there's a natural backlash against doing that, which is think about if you're negotiating with an entrepreneur, the signal that you send to the market can actually be used against you. So as a venture investor, you've got to be a little bit careful not to be too transparent. Good investors, when they show interest in a deal, that deal becomes a hot deal suddenly. So I've had situations where I've gotten interested in the company, and when that entrepreneur tells people that I'm interested in the company, it becomes more people get interested in the company. It's sort of this natural thing. When you hear good things about something from someone you respect, you pay more attention to it. That's why warm introductions matter better than cold introductions. So there's a nice natural break against too much collusion and too much specificity on price collusion. The other way to pursue this as an entrepreneur is make sure you're going in non-overlapping networks as best you can. Now, it's hard because the VC industry is so small, but sometimes you can go to a West Coast firm and an East Coast firm, go to a New York firm and a Boston firm, just get different data points. Look at who co-invests with each other, because if they co-invest with each other, they're on boards together. And if they're on boards together, in the 5 minutes before the board meeting and in the 5 minutes after the board meeting, they're talking about the deals that they're looking at. And just try to find people that don't have those overlapping networks if you can.
I'd like to go back to your pocket things and get your recommendation on the situation. I'm in front of my business plan. I'm ready to put the pitch together for VCs. And one side tells me you have to show a good return on investment on your business plan. And the other side, you say, VC knows that you're going to have to have several rounds of funding. So what is the best to show in the business plan? That you're going to need several rounds of funding because you're going to get bigger and bigger, or to show, let's say, the first phase and make it profitable?
Yeah.
So because they know at the end that whatever you put on your business plan, the actual numbers will be different.
Right. So the question was, what do you show the investors depending on whether you need more money or don't need more money? So think of yourself as a product, and you're selling your product, and you have to figure out what the buyer wants to buy. So again, that sales process mentality. So if you're with an investor, that's a $30 million seed fund, typical check size of $2 million, and they typically don't follow on afterwards. Then you want to show them a P&L and a pitch that fits the product that they want to buy. And if you go into a $500 million fund, who typically likes to write $20 million checks, 10 up front, reserve 10, you got to go in with a product that they want to buy. Now, it's a little confusing because you don't want to have too many different business plans floating around. It's like a public company with an internal plan and an external plan for Wall Street, and everybody gets confused, which I've had happen. So it's the best thing is if you just qualify out of the ones that don't fit. So if you say, I really only want to raise $1 million, if you're not the kind of investor that's happy to write $1 million check, I shouldn't meet with you. Or I should only meet with you and just keep you abreast of what I'm doing so that in a year when I'm ready to raise $6 million, it's a relevant conversation and you'll have watched me progress. I had a couple points on here I wanted to mention. I mentioned about VCs get distracted, stay connected. Oh, the champion. Make sure you have a champion. Every venture firm requires a champion to get a deal done. And the quality of the champion within the partnership determines how effective they are at getting the deal done. So this leads to the whole conversation about associates and principals. Every VC firm, almost every VC firm, has a hierarchy of some kind. Sometimes it's obvious, sometimes it's not obvious. Figure it out so that you know who are the players that are key to the decision. And that doesn't mean you dismiss the associates, because the truth is, if you're rude to the associates or the principals, then they're just going to tell the partners, that person's an asshole. And it's going to reflect very poorly on you. So you've got to be super cool, respectful, friendly, gracious to the junior people, and get them to help you get to the senior people and get the senior people to be your champions. And that's a very difficult thing to do. But if you can't do that, then you probably can't close $1 million deal with Procter & Gamble, right? I mean, any sales process, it's a similar thing. You've got different constituents, and you've got to navigate around them. So that's how you should think about the junior people in a firm. They can be your biggest champions. They can give you great inside information. You want them to be your friend. You want them to be your advocate. But you also want to recognize that you've got to get to the partners to drive the decisions. Address the objections with specific data. Every partnership will have objections to the deal. And they'll say, either explicitly to you or privately within the firm, these are the 2 or 3 reasons why we don't know if we would do this. Market size feels kind of small. Competition, rough. Unit economics don't look that good. As soon as you get a whiff of an objection, just like in a sales process, you got to give data to overcome the objection. And the more you can spoon feed the firm, remember, they're busy, they don't have a lot of time. If you can give them literally the charts that they should be presenting to their partnership, just like you would give a vice president of purchasing the charts that they would present to their purchasing committee, like feed them the data that they need to overcome those objections.
Yeah, a lot of the things you say is the VCs have a lot of leverage and bargaining power with the entrepreneurs. Money is a commodity, so why is there such a shortage of ideas or a combination of ideas and teams that can make the VCs enough money so that they are more interested? This is my first question. And the second one is...
Can I have you pause on that one? Let me address that one.
Yeah.
Is that okay? Because otherwise I may not remember the first one if you go to the second one. Because there's a lot of what you ask, because there's a philosophical question and then there's a very practical question. So on the practical side, I don't think it's true that entrepreneurs have more leverage, less leverage. VCs have more leverage, less leverage. I mean, yes, the VCs have the money, and yes, there are very few of them relative to the entrepreneurs, but the best entrepreneurs have choices. And the best entrepreneurs are the ones that the VCs want to get into. So the best deals are always competitive. And ask any VC, are you in a competitive business or is it like shooting fish in a barrel? And they will whine to you about how competitive a business this is. And it is true. It's a very, very competitive business because your broader philosophical point, which is money is money. And different firms can compete based on value add and based on networks and based on relationships. But at the end of the day, on any great opportunity, there's going to be more than two firms that are going to be at the table wanting to invest. And that's going to be a very competitive process.
Sorry, and this leads to the second question. Why is it so difficult for teams that may have a great idea and will make it to prove if they do not have the track record? For example, many famous people made it for the first time much better than second or third or fourth time.
It's because of the odds. This is a probability game. And for every one story you hear about a wildly successful entrepreneur like Bill Gates, who didn't have a track record but started this company that became a $100 billion monster, there are 999,000 examples of people who didn't succeed. And the hard thing from the investor standpoint is, how do you pick those people that don't have the obvious track record? How do you look underneath what's on paper and see if you can figure out who the really compelling young entrepreneurs are? That's tricky. It's hard. And then I mentioned about creating a sense of urgency. So then you'll have even more due diligence. So this is where the investors really get serious, is when they call your customers. So be prepared for that and prepare your customers. They'll call your partners. They'll check out your team. They'll do diligence on your technology, on your financial model, market size analysis. And again, as I said, package up this information. It's always surprising to me when I get into a diligence process and I say, can I talk to 3 of your customers, that they don't immediately have 3 customers, phone numbers, email addresses, and that they've prepped those customers already to prepare for the call. Also, good investors will go off list, always. So whatever you give them, recognize that they'll go off list. Okay, term sheet. These are the questions I get a lot. Should I include VCs in my first round or just angels? That's a very tricky question. And I guess it depends on what you're trying to achieve in that first round of financing. A lot of people include VCs if they pre-select the VCs they want to work with in the next round. It's a nice way to get to know them. But there's a signaling risk. And people all probably know this, but if you let one VC invest in your angel round, they put in a $200,000 check in your $1 million angel round, and you think, hey, this is great. I get to have them at the table, develop a relationship, and they'll invest in my next round of financing. Well, when the next round comes, they have a huge amount of leverage over you. Because if they pass, every other VC says, well, why did they pass? They knew you the best. They're an existing investor. They spent a year with you on your angel round, and they passed. That's a really negative signal. And so smart entrepreneurs try to avoid signaling problems if they're going to let VCs in their angel rounds, and either bring in 2 or 3 VCs, so they create a competitive dynamic, 0, or if they do 1, they pick one who they have a huge amount of trust in, and they're very crisp about the milestones that they have to achieve. And if they hit those milestones, the next round will come in. And I've had people pre-negotiate price as well as milestones, because again, you have a lot of leverage. The VC has a lot of leverage if they don't pre-negotiate price with the entrepreneur. How big should the option pool be? So when an investor puts forward a term sheet with an option pool, they're sending a signal about what they think of the management team. If you see in a term sheet with a 20% option pool, they're saying, I need to hire a CEO. If you see a term sheet with a 5 or 10% option pool, they're saying, you're the CEO. So just be thoughtful about what signal they're sending with the option pool. I encourage entrepreneurs, do an option budget. Just like you have a financial budget where you have how much money you're going to have each person cost you on the staff, have how much in options they'll cost you. Because if you put forward an option budget, it's very clear how much you need, and as opposed to just arguing over philosophically 20%, 15%, whatever. You show the option budget. This is what I need. CFO costs me 1%, CTO 2%, director of products 0.5%. for the first year, all I need is 5 points of ownership, 10 points of ownership. Valuation. So I have a different way of looking at valuation than most people. So don't look at the pre-money. The pre-money is meaningless. Don't look at the post-money. The post-money is meaningless. And don't look at the option pool. The option pool is meaningless. The number that matters is the promote. And I did a blog post on this if you want more detail, but in short, the promote is your percent ownership, you as the founder, at the end of the financing. Because the option pool will dilute you, the pre and the post will have different impacts with how much money you're raising versus how much you're not raising. But at the end of the day, if you're at a $10 million post money and you own 10%, you have a $1 million promote. And that's the most important number. Because now you have $1 million of value that you're carrying forward to try to create. And the promote varies based on all of those knobs. So some VCs will play games with you. They'll say, hey, I'll hit your pre-money that you want. You say you want a $5 million pre-money, but the option pool has to be 25%. And it's very hard to evaluate what that means. And am I raising $2 million or $3 million or $5 million? So what really matters is post-money, your ownership, times the post-money. That's the only number that matters for you in terms of evaluating different deals. Does everybody get that? Reasonably clear?
Can you repeat that again? The calculation.
So the calculation is the post-money valuation. So if it's a $5 million raise on $5 million pre, it's a $10 million post. And if you own 20%, then your promote is 20% of that $10 million post-money valuation. You now own 20% of a company that was valued in the market $10 million. So you own $2 million that you're carrying forward. That's the most important number. That's how to think about value.
Are you saying that's important because that just puts in terms for you what your maximum upside is, or is that more of, from a VC perspective, if the entrepreneur has enough money to continue to work and put everything into the company?
That's the latter is definitely true, but I'm more mean as you evaluate the economic value of a term sheet. That's the calculation you should make as an entrepreneur in thinking about what's my stake worth after this financing is done. Convertible notes. People in seed financings have many options, typically 3. A priced round, a convertible note with no cap, or a convertible note with a cap. A priced round means you price the round at some pre-money valuation. So $1 million on 4 means you're selling 20% of the company. You've priced the round at $5 million post. The round is set. Whoever invests after that, you'll want to try to sell them capital at a higher price than the $5 million post. You'll want to do an up round. So that's the priced round. A convertible note, typically with a discount, means you raise $1 million and you say, I'm not going to price the round. It's too early. I don't really know how to think about valuation. For the people who give me the $1 million of risk capital today, I'm going to give them a 20% discount to convert into the next round of financing. So if the next round of financing is at a $10 million pre, then the $1 million of angel money converts at $8 million pre. So that's a convertible note with no cap at a 20% discount. Convertible note with a cap means I'll take $1 million. I just want it quick and simple. I won't do a big fancy set of documents to sell you equity. But the person who puts in $1 million wants to lock in a cap, a ceiling for the price. And so $1 million with a $5 million cap in a $1 million convertible note means the $1 million is priced when the round happens at $5 million pre. Even if you raise the round at $20 million pre, the round is raised at $5 million pre. Unfortunately, I don't have time to go through all the nuances of why you would choose one or the other, but there's a lot of material out there on this, and there are a lot of trade-offs. Personally, I prefer to price rounds, even at the beginning. Second choice for me would be, as an entrepreneur, I would prefer to price the round at the very beginning. Second choice for me would be a convertible note with no cap, if you get somebody to give you that as an entrepreneur, that's spectacular. At no discount.
Yeah, so how do you think about what cap it should be set at? Because it seems to me like some people will use the cap as almost like you're pricing the round.
You are. That's why convertible notes with a cap are basically pricing the round.
And are you pricing at what you think it's
That's why I prefer to price the round. If we're going to price the round, let's price the round. Let's not play games.
And VCs will generally price it at what they think it's worth now or in a year when you price the round?
It's all a negotiation.
Okay. And then just to follow up on that real quick,
Yeah.
Have you seen people alter the terms? Like let's say you do convert now, and a year from now when you actually do a price round, you find out one way or the other it was really unfair for someone?
Yes.
How often does that happen?
Rarely. But the new investors have leverage, and if you as the entrepreneur have a relationship with the early angels, sometimes you can change the terms. In a competitive situation, you have less. The new investors have much less leverage, obviously, to change terms. So that typically happens when you're more desperate to raise money. You've overpriced the angel round, and now you need to address the overpricing.
Okay, I know everybody's waiting for pizza, so I don't want to take too long.
That's okay.
But I noticed Naval Ravikant, AngelList, right? He had an interview this week that said there are a lot of entrepreneurs doing seed rounds where they have like rolling convertible notes. Have you heard about this? Where
Time-based?
Yeah, time-based. What they do, they'll do $250,000. The first investment, they'll have a lower cap.
Yes.
And then they'll do another $500,000 convertible note.
Yes.
A couple months after that, they'll have a little bit higher cap.
Yeah.
And it prices it for.
Personally, I think that's a lot of financial engineering for small dollars.
Okay. I mean, how do you look at that as a VC? If you saw somebody come in with these 3 different groups of convertible documents, are you just like, this is a pain in the ass? Or?
The first question investors ask themselves is, do I really want this to be the 1 or 2 most important things I work on this year? And do I want to spend the next 6 to 8 years of my life on this company? Once you've gotten over that, some of those stuff, that's all in the details. Last thing, control. Really important decision you have to make is how you should think about control. How much control are you willing to give the investor? I mentioned in the beginning, venture capitalists versus angels demand different levels of control. There are a lot of nuances in those demands. Voting rights, the board, protective provisions, vetoes, blocks, voting thresholds. Get a good lawyer to help explain those things to you. I dedicate chapter 4 to it, and even in a chapter 25 or so page chapter, I only cover the high level points, sort of the summary points. But people sometimes get so focused on the valuation, they miss the control, and then a year or 2 into the venture, it bites them because they didn't really think through, oh my God, I've just sold, it's like the Faustian bargain, I've just sold my soul, and now I can't control my own destiny. I have to get permission from this firm. And by the way, the partner who I really liked at the time of the financing has left, and now I got stuck with someone else who didn't champion the deal and no longer really cares about what I'm doing and is like an orphan. Expectations and milestones. I got 2 more slides, and then it's pizza time. Expectations and milestones. So really, really important. Document milestones. Once you get the deal done, make sure you're very explicit with the investor about what you will achieve with that capital and put it in writing. Memorialize it. There's nothing worse than having confusion 1 year into a venture where you say, hey, I achieved all my milestones, and the investor says, no, my bar was up here. I'm not giving you follow-on capital because I told my partners you would achieve these things. You've got to memorialize these things. Team building milestones, technical progress, etc. And I personally like it when I can have a conversation with my entrepreneurs about their expectations for the next round the moment the first round is done. I used to have a saying as an entrepreneur, you're always raising capital. As soon as that round of capital was financed, you start raising the next round of funding. And you have those conversations with your investors. If I hit those milestones, what would you pay for this company? It just sets the bar in a really explicit way. So here's market. People if you want some rules of thumb, I've given you a couple. Here's some more. And I'm sure I'm off on these, but just to give you sort of a grounding. So seed rounds, raising $500,000 to a couple $1 million, typically $3 to $5 million pre-money is what market feels like right now. I've heard of stories of 6, I've heard of stories of 8, I've heard less, but the typical range is 3 to 5, whether it's a priced round or a convertible note with a cap at those levels.
Are you talking about specific industries here?
I have found this to be pretty generic across industries. I would say, yeah, I've found it pretty generic across industries. Sometimes healthcare companies, biotech companies, and fabless semiconductor companies that are going to be more capital intensive, they'll skip right to the Series A or Series B and don't do seed rounds. But this tends to be roughly the numbers. Series A, $4 to $6 million raise, 6 to 12 million pre-money. It's kind of classic. Again, outliers are on the high end, but this is the typical range.
How is this trending? How have you seen this move in the last year, especially when there's been a bit of a flat?
Yeah, there are a bunch of data sources that I look at. Over the last 7 or 8 years, seed rounds have been relatively flat. Slight uptick maybe during certain hot times. We're in a relatively hot time. Series A have been relatively flat. What's really trended up in the last few years has been Series C and Series D rounds. Because as the IPO market improves and the capital markets improve, people have higher bars as to what they think they can achieve. And so the growth rounds are where you've really seen more price elasticity. The early stage rounds, 10 years as an entrepreneur, 10 years as a VC, this is roughly what it's been for a long, long time.
I'm not sure if you addressed that, but when you raise money, the amount of money that you want to raise, is it sort of time-based? You want that money to last for 2 years, or is it milestone-based?
A little of both. Typically, investors like 12 to 18 months. 18 to 24 months is sort of the range for the capital. 12 months for seed, more like 18, 24 for Series B.
I don't know if you have it later. You haven't talked anything about dilution.
This is all dilution.
I'm talking about, as you go from seed to Series A, Series B.
Yeah.
How it affects the percentages. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, so the math on dilution is whatever the investor buys, 1 minus that is
but
what you keep.
what is in the market? How it goes, the percentages?
Ask me after if this, because I think this gives you that, but maybe I'm not understanding your question. Series B, 8 to 12, 15 to 25 pre is typically what you see. That's it. That's the number. So key themes. I just want to hammer forward one more time, then I'll stick around. We'll have some pizza and hang out. But key themes: you're in control of the process. Demand transparency. Get to know investors through warm introductions over a period of time, and try to create a dynamic where you're running a sales process and run it like a process, where you get a sense of urgency, a competitive dynamic to give yourself choices. It's all about leverage, choices, and alternatives. Thank you very much.